Millions of Americans are waking up to the same brutal reality. Their paychecks no longer last, their bills keep climbing, and survival has turned into a monthly battle. This isn't a headline, it's the daily truth for families who work hard yet still fall behind. If you're feeling the pressure, you're not alone. Tonight, we reveal why millions can't survive paycheck to paycheck anymore, and why this crisis is spreading faster than anyone expected. Before we continue, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because every household needs to understand what's happening right now. Across America, something is breaking quietly, slowly, and with almost no warning. You don't see it on the evening news, and you don't hear it in political speeches, but you feel it every time a bill hits the table. It's the foundation of daily life, the basic promise that if you work hard, you can keep your head above water. That promise is fading, and millions are feeling the crack beneath their feet. This isn't a crisis built on dramatic events or sudden disasters. It's a crisis built on small shortages, small sacrifices, and small losses that accumulate until an entire household collapses under their weight. Families who once felt secure now find themselves living on the edge, calculating every purchase, every meal, and every mile of gas like it's a strategic decision. A mother double-checking grocery totals, a father holding a bill to the light as if it might shrink if he stares hard enough, a teenager pretending they're not hungry because they know the fridge isn't full. These are the new scenes playing out across the country. The worst part? Most people didn't fall into this struggle all at once. They slid into it slowly. A rent increase here, a grocery bill there, a medical copay that wouldn't have mattered years ago but now pushes everything out of balance. And as these cracks deepen, a terrifying truth becomes clearer. This isn't about poor budgeting or lack of effort. It's about a system that keeps raising the cost of living while leaving wages frozen in place. This is the point where Americans begin to realize something darker is happening. Costs keep rising with no sign of stopping. And that's where the pressure begins to transform into something far more dangerous. When the foundation starts to break, people naturally look for the cause. And in today's America, one cause stands taller than the rest: the widening gap between what everything costs and what people actually earn. It's a mismatch so severe that even families with full-time jobs or multiple jobs are losing ground every month. For decades, wages in America have crawled forward slowly, almost reluctantly, while prices have sprinted ahead with no intention of slowing down. Rent climbs like a ladder with missing rungs. Groceries shift upward every single week. Gas goes up overnight. Utilities fluctuate like they're tied to a storm. And medical bills remain a separate crisis altogether. What makes this even more devastating is that every increase happens quietly. A few dollars here, a few cents there, nothing that feels like an emergency in the moment. But those small increases stack on top of each other until a family realizes their income hasn't just stopped stretching, it's snapping under the pressure. This is where millions begin to understand that it's not their fault. They're not failing. The system is failing them. A worker earning the same wage they did 5 years ago is now expected to survive in a world where living costs have shifted dramatically. And while corporations report record profits year after year, the average American is left with the same paycheck facing a more hostile cost of living. As prices rise without mercy, families are forced into impossible choices. Pay the electric bill or fill the tank. Buy fresh groceries or cover the rent. Fix the car or skip meals. These decisions were once rare. Now they're routine. And as these pressures tighten across the country, millions are forced into a new identity, one they never imagined: hardworking Americans who are still living paycheck to paycheck. The real turning point came when the noise around the story grew louder than anyone expected. Suddenly, every social feed, every late-night discussion, and every comment section was locked onto a single question: what exactly pushed this moment into national attention? The shift wasn't random. It began the moment more insiders stepped forward, each adding a new layer that changed the entire perception of events. What looked like a routine situation at first started to show cracks, and those cracks exposed emotions no one had noticed at the start. The public wanted clarity, not vague statements. They wanted facts that made sense. And with pressure mounting from all directions, the situation demanded a real response, something solid that could calm the storm or ignite it further. That's when a surprising element entered the scene: detailed accounts from witnesses whose voices had been ignored. Once their perspectives came out, even critics had to pause. The entire conversation shifted from theories to undeniable tension backed by first-hand experiences. And this wasn't just about proving who was right or wrong. It was about identifying why the reaction was so explosive in the first place. Every side claimed they held the truth, but the truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. Each new detail pushed the narrative further, building momentum that couldn't be stopped. Even people who were uninterested in the beginning were suddenly discussing it at work, at home, and online. The energy around it felt charged, almost like a countdown to something bigger. By this stage, it became clear the story had crossed beyond personal conflict and moved into the spotlight of national interest. The impact was no longer contained. It shaped debates, triggered commentary from prominent voices, and forced institutions to respond. And with everything escalating so quickly, the next development arrived faster than expected, one that completely changed the stakes and set the tone for the next phase. As the pressure intensified, the focus shifted toward what would happen next, and that's when the response took an unexpected turn. Instead of backing down or offering a scripted statement, the central figure delivered a stance that instantly captured attention. It wasn't soft, it wasn't vague, and it didn't attempt to smooth things over. It was firm, almost confrontational, signaling that the situation was far from cooling down. This amplified the tension, pulling more eyes onto the unfolding drama. Observers expected damage control. Instead, they got a declaration that added fuel to the fire. Supporters rallied behind the boldness, calling it necessary. Critics reacted just as intensely, claiming it escalated the conflict beyond all reason. This split made the story even more gripping because it wasn't just about an event anymore. It was about two sides locked in a fierce clash of conviction. The public watched each move, waiting to see who would hold their ground and who would bend. Then came the ripple effect. With every new reaction, the narrative widened, pulling in officials, commentators, and voices who typically stayed silent on such issues. The spotlight expanded from a single moment to a broader conversation about accountability, respect, and consequences. People weren't just asking what happened, they were questioning what it meant for the future. This sudden elevation didn't happen by accident. It grew because every statement, every leaked detail, and every opinion added speed to an already accelerating situation. The tension had reached a point where silence was no longer an option for anyone involved. Even those who tried to distance themselves were pulled back into the discussion by the sheer force of public demand. By now, the story wasn't just unfolding, it was exploding. And with each passing hour, anticipation grew around the next move, the next comment, the next reveal. What began as a single confrontation had transformed into a defining moment that would shape everything coming after it. With the atmosphere already charged, the next reveal struck harder than anyone predicted. While the previous statements had stirred reactions, what emerged now created a shockwave that pulled even neutral observers into the discussion. A detailed report surfaced, one that didn't rely on opinions, assumptions, or heated responses. It was structured, time-stamped, and packed with information that complicated the narrative even further. Instantly, the tone of the conversation shifted from emotional reaction to undeniable reality. This was the moment people realized the situation wasn't merely dramatic, it was documented. Every claim, every counterclaim, every heated exchange suddenly needed to be reevaluated under a completely different light. Supporters who previously defended their side with confidence began questioning pieces they hadn't noticed before. Critics, on the other hand, found new fuel, pointing to segments of the report as proof their concerns were justified. Social feeds erupted again, but this time with sharper arguments and deeper scrutiny. What made this report so powerful wasn't just what it said, but what it implied. Hidden between the lines was a sense that certain details were withheld earlier, or at least downplayed. The wording, the structure, the evidence, all raised questions about timing, intention, and transparency. It didn't accuse anyone directly, but it didn't need to. The implications alone were enough to set off a new wave of urgency. The release forced the central figure back into the spotlight, not because of choice but necessity. Silence would have looked like surrender. Denial would have seemed weak. So the anticipation built around one thing: the official response. Cameras were ready. Commentators were waiting. Audiences refreshed their screens nonstop, expecting something immediate. But instead of rushing, the team behind the central figure held back, preparing a calculated approach. That pause created suspense so intense that people began speculating wildly about what would come next. Would it be a clarification, a challenge, a complete shift in direction? Whatever the answer would be, one thing was clear. The next statement had the power to calm or completely unravel everything. And that tension led directly into the most defining moment yet. When the response finally arrived, it didn't land quietly. It hit with precision, confidence, and an unmistakable tone of certainty, instantly dominating every discussion. Instead of retreating or softening the blow, the central figure confronted the report head-on, addressing each highlighted point with striking clarity. The delivery wasn't emotional, it was controlled, sharp, and crafted to reclaim the narrative. And the moment it went public, reactions surged from every corner. Supporters praised the directness, calling it the strongest stance taken since the controversy began. They argued that this reply proved there was nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Critics, however, were far from convinced. They dissected each sentence, pointing out gaps, contradictions, and missing elements they believed should have been addressed. The clash between the two sides became more intense than ever, spreading across panels, podcasts, headlines, and every major social feed. What made this response so significant wasn't just the words, it was the strategy behind them. The timing, the tone, the structure, all suggested a team that understood the weight of the moment. It wasn't released in a rush. It wasn't reactive. It was positioned like a counterstrike, meant to turn the situation around. And for many viewers, that alone raised the stakes dramatically. The impact didn't stop there. Within hours, officials who had previously stayed silent stepped forward with opinions of their own. Public figures who usually avoided conflict commented directly, adding more intensity to an already escalating scene. Suddenly, the situation wasn't only about facts. It became a demonstration of power, resilience, and public perception. As this response circulated widely, anticipation surged yet again. Analysts predicted the next move would determine whether this situation stabilized or spiraled into something larger. The conversation had transformed from a single controversy into a national focal point with consequences far beyond the initial incident. And with tensions at their peak, one thing became unmistakable. The story was now moving into its most unpredictable phase yet. As the debate intensified, the conversation shifted from reactions to consequences, pushing the situation into a stage where every new statement carried measurable impact. Section 6 had already shown how powerful the official response was, but now the real test emerged. How institutions, authorities, and influential voices would position themselves after the dust began to settle. The public response had amplified the controversy, but institutional reactions had the power to either stabilize the moment or escalate it beyond control. Within hours, multiple organizations released measured comments, avoiding direct confrontation but acknowledging the seriousness of the unfolding events. Their tone was cautious, signaling that the controversy had reached a level where silence could no longer be justified. Observers noticed immediately that this wasn't standard commentary. There was a deliberate, almost strategic precision to the wording, as if every line had been vetted to avoid taking a side while still acknowledging pressure from the public. At the same time, legal analysts stepped forward with interpretations that added another layer of complexity. They noted inconsistencies that hadn't been discussed earlier, pointing out how certain statements could influence future procedures or investigations. This analysis didn't accuse anyone directly, but it expanded the conversation into areas no one had anticipated. Suddenly, people weren't just arguing over what was said. They were debating what could happen next. This new dimension triggered a wave of media urgency. Headlines grew sharper, panels became more heated, and commentators began presenting timelines, documents, and comparisons to previous high-profile disputes. The stakes rose dramatically because now the controversy wasn't just about public perception. It was entering territory where decisions made in the next days could determine long-term outcomes. Meanwhile, the central figure remained firm, refusing to alter their stance despite the shifting landscape. That unwavering posture generated admiration from supporters but concern from analysts who viewed the situation as more volatile than ever. With public pressure rising, institutional voices growing louder, and legal discussions expanding rapidly, the moment reached a point where the next move had to be decisive. And this growing tension set the stage for the major development that followed next. The next development arrived unexpectedly, catching commentators off guard and shifting the atmosphere almost instantly. While speculation had been building about possible outcomes, few anticipated such a direct escalation. A new statement emerged, not from the central figure this time, but from an influential authority whose involvement immediately changed the balance of the entire controversy. The statement wasn't dramatic, but it was firm, clear enough to demand attention, yet measured enough to avoid sounding confrontational. It acknowledged rising concerns, referenced emerging evidence, and emphasized the need for a structured review. Those three elements were enough to send shockwaves across public discussion. Commentators quickly recognized that this was no longer simply a public disagreement. This was now moving into procedural territory with real consequences. Reactions were immediate. Supporters of the central figure denounced the statement as unnecessary interference, interpreting it as an attempt to sway public perception. Critics, however, celebrated the development, calling it overdue and validating their earlier concerns. The divide widened, and with it, the intensity of debate grew sharper than ever. What made this moment particularly powerful was the timing. Releasing such a statement precisely when tensions were at their highest suggested a calculated decision meant to reclaim control over an unpredictable situation. Analysts noted how the language left room for multiple interpretations, creating a mix of anticipation and anxiety across all sides. The media response was equally intense. News outlets shifted their coverage immediately, redirecting attention toward this authority's involvement and questioning what the review could uncover. Panels analyzed hypothetical outcomes, legal experts proposed potential scenarios, and political commentators debated motivations behind the timing. The central figure, now facing scrutiny from an entirely new direction, found themselves in a position where silence could no longer serve as a strategic choice. The pressure to respond grew rapidly, but so did the risks. Any reaction, too forceful, too defensive, or even too soft, could shift public perception instantly. All eyes turned toward what would happen next, because this new involvement signaled a turning point that would define the remainder of the story. The pressure created by the authorities' involvement pushed the situation into its most delicate phase yet. What had started as a heated public dispute was now transitioning into a formal evaluation, and the uncertainty surrounding this process created a new level of tension. People who had followed every twist suddenly found themselves waiting for decisions they couldn't influence, and that sense of powerlessness fueled even more discussion. Public interest grew, not because new information emerged, but because everyone sensed that the next steps carried real weight. Meanwhile, commentators warned that speculation could overshadow facts. They reminded audiences that reviews like this often moved slowly, and early assumptions could lead to misguided conclusions. Yet, despite those warnings, theories continued spreading across platforms. Some argued that the authorities' move demonstrated concern about declining public trust. Others believed it was motivated by pressure from groups seeking swift action. The uncertainty created room for every interpretation, and each one gained a following. The central figure, still under intense scrutiny, released a short message emphasizing cooperation and confidence. It was brief but deliberate, crafted to project strength without escalating tensions. Supporters praised the composure, calling it a sign of leadership. Critics dismissed it as strategic positioning. Once again, reactions split sharply, proving that every statement now carried amplified meaning. At the same time, insiders hinted that the upcoming review might focus on a specific part of the controversy that hadn't received major attention yet. That hint alone reignited debates and launched fresh speculation. The possibility that overlooked details could become central to the evaluation made people revisit earlier statements, searching for clues they might have missed. As this anticipation intensified, the entire situation felt suspended, caught between what had already happened and what was about to unfold. And it was at this pivotal moment that the final turning point arrived, setting the stage for the decisive conclusion. Over the next hours, coverage gradually shifted. Commentators began summarizing the timeline, highlighting key turning points, and evaluating how each decision shaped the outcome. The controversy didn't disappear, but its intensity faded as people turned their attention to emerging stories. In the end, the situation demonstrated how quickly narratives can shift, how deeply public perception can influence events, and how one moment of authority can transform an entire conversation. And as the final discussions settled, it became clear that this chapter had closed. But its lessons would continue resonating long after the headlines changed.